our next speaker, who does have a tremendous amount of energy when it comes to thorough research. And when I mean thorough, it's the most thorough that I've ever seen. Excellent. Well, it's the fantastic Dr. Trudi Deakin PhD. Thanks a lot, Trudi.
Thank you. So last year I came on after Tim Noakes, and then the day I come on after Tom Watson. So thanks, Sam. I guess really I'm a rebel dietitian that loves to use the F word. So here we go. Before I start, I just want to ask the audience, how many people here, or how many people know somebody who has eaten less, moved more, and put weight on? Yeah? And do you fully understand the science behind that? Yeah? So shall we finish now and just go to the pub? Well, I'm just going to explore that topic a little bit more. So disclosures, I'm employed by the charity Expert Health, and we're governed by the Charity Commission. And as a general principle, myself nor the charity will take funds from Big Pharma or Big Food. However, last week I couldn't resist in entering into a debate. I entered into a lot of debates, and this debate was calories versus carbs. So you can understand which side I argued for. And Expert Health did receive a speaker fee from Sanofi to do that, but it wasn't for the promotion of any medications or anything like that. So this morning I'm going to talk about the problem, the proposed solution for that problem, the limitations with that proposed solution, a little bit around the science of metabolism, and then finish off with the real solution. So what is the problem in health today? It's the levels of obesity, isn't it? So 2/3 of the population are overweight, and 1 in 4 adults are obese. But we know that it's the visceral fat which is the greatest concern. And since 1993, the waist circumference of females has increased by 6 centimetres, and the waist circumference of males has increased by 3 centimetres. And that puts almost half of women in the high-risk category for waist circumference, and around 1/3 of men. So that's really scary. Now, when people want to lose weight, they tend to go to Google. So if you type in Google lose weight, you come up with the NHS weight management plan. It's really good to see that diet doctor's there, but that's probably because I go into diet doctor a lot. So what does the NHS say is the solution? It's all about calories. And when people are educated to count calories, then they're also educated to consume low-fat foods, because low-fat foods are lower in calories. So this is the NHS weight loss plan, and they focus on calories, and they say to lose half a kilo or a kilo a week, then women need to have on average around 14,000 calories, and men around 19,000 calories per day to achieve that weight loss. But 100, sorry. That would be a lot. So either 1,400 or 1,900 calories per day. But doesn't the Diet and Nutrition Survey tell us that's actually what people are having? So is it a calorie problem? We know it isn't. So when people just focus on calories, then it's basically eat what you want as long as you count the calories. So the donut becomes okay. The sugary drinks become okay. And shock horror with the NHS kind of snack guide, even I took my mum to a hospital appointment, and there were the healthy options in the cafe in the hospital. So, you know, Mum, I'll get you a Kit Kat or Milky Way, because it's a healthy option now, because it has around 100 calories. That's shocking, isn't it? So, yeah, it's the wrong tactic, isn't it? So when people eat less and move more, yeah, they create an energy deficit. And will that energy deficit result in weight loss? It will do in the short term. But then what happens? Weight loss plateaus. Why does it plateau? It's because the basal metabolic rate, the BMR, reduces. When the basal metabolic rate reduces, how do people feel? Often disillusioned, and it's a struggle of willpower, isn't it? So at some point, they start to reintroduce the foods that they've been missing. And what happens? Weight regain. And so the set point then in an individual, because the weight regain is often, puts them at a weight that is higher than they were before they started the diet. So we all know that the diet, the after story from going on a weight loss diet, solely focusing on calories, low-fat foods, and eating frequently, results in weight regain. And what does that do to someone's willpower? They say, it's my fault. Their confidence is reduced, and they say, I didn't try hard enough. So next time they want to lose weight, what do? They do exactly the same. So it becomes a vicious circle. What's the probability, annual probability, of a male or a female actually achieving a normal body mass index? 1 in 124 people for females and 1 in 210 people for males actually achieve a normal weight. That's shocking, isn't it? So certainly what people are trying to do to obtain a normal weight isn't working. So let's look at this plateau. If someone requires 2,000 calories a day and they take in 2,000 calories a day and they burn 2,000 calories a day, their weight will remain stable. If someone decides to go on a weight loss diet and reduce their calories without considering what they're eating, they'll reduce their calories perhaps to 1,500 calories a day. But what isn't recognised is that calories out, or calorie expenditure, isn't stable. So the calories will also reduce eventually down to 1,500 calories a day. So there's a weight loss and then there's a plateau. And if that individual is really, really motivated, they'll say, oh, I've plateaued, what shall I do? I'll further reduce my calories. So they may further reduce their calories down to 1,200 calories a day, but then the basal metabolic rate will adapt and also reduce down to burning 1,200 calories per day. And so there's an initial weight loss and then plateau. And what do we call this? This is called metabolic adaptation. It's also known as adaptive thermogenesis. And what it is, it's the reduction in resting energy expenditure below that you'd expect for weight loss. So when some people lose weight, their resting energy expenditure reduces because they haven't got as much weight to carry around with them. But this metabolic adaptation is the reduction in that resting energy expenditure beyond that you'd expect for the weight loss. And this is what favours the regain, often increasing that person's set point. And we've known this for more than 100 years. So in 1918, they did a study where they reduced the calorie intake in men by about a third to half. And they saw a 12% reduction in body weight, but they also saw a 30% reduction in basal metabolic rate. And then the famous minestrone starvation experiment done by Ansel Keys, what they did is that they put males on a semi-starvation diet for a few months, and what they found is that they lost about 25% of their body weight, and their resting energy expenditure dropped. So their basal metabolic rate dropped. And these men also reported feeling cold, tired, depressed, sex drive went down. They became obsessed with food. How many people do we see who feel cold and tired, obsessed with food from going on a reduced calorie diet? More recently, you've probably all heard of The Big Loser, the US competition, and it's done through Eat Less, Move More. And they followed these individuals up. You know, initially they lost 58 kilos, which is a lot of weight to lose. And they followed them up at 6 years. And at 6 years, the weight gain had been 41 kilos. So a majority of the weight loss had been regained. And they looked at the metabolic adaptation. They would have expected by the weight loss that people would have a reduced energy expenditure of around 200 calories. But what they found is that the reduced energy expenditure was around 700 calories, 500 calories more than what was expected. And even though these individuals had put the majority of the weight back on, that metabolic adaptation remained. So it means that for the rest of their lives, these individuals have to eat 500 fewer calories per day just to maintain their weight. So that's scary and it's depressing. There's also limitations with move more, because if people solely move more to lose weight, we know it's not effective. And that's because exercise is only a very, very small proportion of the total energy expenditure. So total energy expenditure is a sum of basal metabolic rate, which is about 70% of the total energy expenditure. And then TEF is the energy that we use when we process food, when we digest food. So it's the thermogenic effect of food. NEAT is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that is the exercise that you burn when you're just general moving, not exercising, but just general movement throughout the day. The EPOC is the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And then you've got the exercise. Now, if an individual follows the physical recommendations of 30 minutes activity per day, then that may only amount to about 5% of the total energy expenditure for that day. So is it really going to contribute to weight loss? So we know the benefits of exercise, you know, for general health, but it's not the best way to lose weight. And that is probably because 30 minutes is an insufficient amount. We also know that physical activity can drive the hunger hormones like ghrelin. And also we know, especially with children, when they're forced to do activity at school, then they have more sedentary time outside school, so that you know, the general movement slows down. If people go to the gym for half an hour, they sit around for the rest of the evening saying, oh, I've done my exercise for the day. So moving on to the science now, we're either in the fed state or the fasted state. And when we're in the fed state, if there's carbohydrates that have been consumed, then we produce insulin. And what does insulin do? It's an energy storage hormone. So when we produce insulin, then we are storing energy from food. In conditions like type 1 diabetes, where people don't produce the insulin, then low insulin, so people on a low-carb diet, also, low insulin means that we can take fat from our adipose tissue and use that for fuel in the body. So insulin means energy storage, and no insulin or low insulin means energy fuel. And that's the difference between lipogenesis and lipolysis. Now, why is insulin important? Well, we know that insulin drives obesity. So this is a graph here showing that in normal lean individuals, both glucose levels and insulin levels are low. Now, the bolded dots here are the insulin. So as people gain weight, then you can see that insulin goes up. So obesity is a condition of hyperinsulinemia. But even in advanced diabetes, type 2 diabetes here, you see here that the insulin levels are much, much higher at baseline than they are in lean individuals and postprandially as well. So type 2 diabetes and obesity are conditions of hyperinsulinemia. And we know that hyperinsulinemia is a driving force of many conditions that we see, chronic conditions that we see in today's health. We've known that type 2 diabetes is a condition of hyperinsulinemia since 1960. But what we're very good at is treating the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, blood glucose control, rather than treating the cause of diabetes. And in the UK, we don't even measure insulin levels unless it's under research conditions. So diabetes has more than doubled in the last 20 years, and these are graphics from Diabetes UK. So we know that we have 4.7 million people with diabetes now. 90% of them have type 2 diabetes, and that's 1 in 15 individuals. So one gets diagnosed with diabetes every 2 minutes. That's really scary. And furthermore, there's 12.3 million people at risk of developing diabetes, mainly type 2. And this is a study that's been done very recently in Western Sydney. And it tells me that actually the Diabetes UK estimates could be an underestimate, because this is saying that, you know, they tested 61,000 individuals and they found that the prevalence of diabetes was 17.5% and the prevalence of pre-diabetes 30%. So that's almost 1 in 2 adults having either pre-diabetes or diabetes, and it could be the same in the UK. But like I said, insulin isn't measured in the UK. So there could be even more people at risk, because we talk about the metabolic syndrome. And blood glucose control is only one of the 5 criteria considered in the metabolic syndrome. So there might be even more people out there who have got normal blood glucose levels, but who have a high waist circumference, high triglyceride levels, low HDL, and raised blood pressure. So these people could also, because we say that the metabolic syndrome is a condition of insulin resistance. So I just think it's a coincidence. If 2/3 of the population is overweight, then it's very, very likely that 2/3 of the population also have insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. And why is insulin resistance a problem? Well, it's a vicious cycle, isn't it? So we know that if people eat carbohydrate beyond their carbohydrate threshold level, then it's converted to fat. And then the cells can resist the insulin. So that drives the beta cells in the pancreas to make more insulin, allowing people to feel more hungry and tired, so they consume more food. And most people consume more carbohydrate food. So that vicious cycle goes round and round and round. We know then insulin levels are low, and I've already explained this. When insulin levels are low, such as in undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, or in people following a low carbohydrate or intermittent fasting dietary approach, we know that fat burning opportunity in the body, the lipolysis, increases. So the fat breakdown in the body increases, so you can fuel from fat. But in perhaps 2/3 of the population, insulin levels high, so down here insulin levels are high, then high insulin levels mean that the body is in the fat storage mode, so the lipogenesis, the new production of fat. And so how easy is it going to be for these individuals to lose weight? It's not going to be easy, it's going to be very, very difficult. And this study here is showing us that, you know, the amount of free fatty acids in the plasma significantly reduces when there's an insulin infusion. So when we inject insulin into an individual, their ability to use fat for fuel reduces. And that's why people, when we put people with type 2 diabetes on insulin, that's why they gain weight. This is also interesting. So here, there's no flux of fatty acids going either into the fat cells or into the circulation. When we're fasting here, so the overnight fast, there is a flux of fatty acids leaving our fat cells, our adipose tissue, and going into circulation, because we're using those as fuel to fuel us, give us an energy source as we're sleeping, or if you're practicing intermittent fasting. But when people consume meals, breakfast, lunch and evening meal, the flux of the fatty acids are going from the circulation into the adipose tissue, and that is because in a fed state, we're storing energy. And we all know people that can perhaps eat what they want and not put weight on, and they're probably very, very insulin sensitive, so they produce just the right amount of insulin for the amount of carbohydrate they've eaten. But those people who have a weight problem or struggle with their weight, they produce here a lot more insulin compared to those people who are more insulin sensitive. So which nutrients impact on insulin levels the most? We all know it's carbohydrate, and that's why we know the effectiveness of carbohydrate diets. So when we eat food, it breaks down to carbohydrate, protein and fat. And carbohydrate is the only nutrient that directly impacts on blood glucose levels. So a slice of bread, 15 grams of carbohydrate. What are the building blocks? Glucose. So starch is just building blocks of glucose. 3 teaspoons of sugar, 15 grams of carbohydrate. But the building blocks are slightly different because it's half fructose and half glucose. Fruit has got even more, so a small 130 gram apple, 15 grams of carbohydrate, but there's slightly more fructose, so the green dots there in the fruit than glucose. And then we've got lactose in milk. What is lactose? Half a pint of milk, 15 grams of carbohydrate, and it's half glucose and half galactose. Does that really matter? Well, the glucose goes directly into the blood, but the fructose and the galactose gets processed by the liver first. So the glucose stimulates the rise in blood glucose levels, whereas the fructose and the galactose get stored in the liver. Initially as glycogen, but if glycogen stores are full, a process of de novo lipogenesis, which is new production of fat, converts it to triglycerides, and that's what can cause the fatty liver. So the glucose in the blood stimulates the insulin produced in the beta cells in the pancreas, and the insulin acts like a lock. It fits into the keyhole in the cell wall, unlocks the door, and allows the glucose to leave the blood and go into the body cell, so it can be converted into energy, and we can go about our normal daily activities. So what are normal blood glucose levels? Between 3.5 and 7.8. So what happens when an individual overconsumes or eats carbohydrate beyond their carbohydrate tolerance level? They produce more insulin. And the insulin levels increase, and what does that do? It causes people to store more energy in the cells, which causes the overweight cells. The cells become stuffed initially, full of glycogen and then full of fat. So the cells become overweight and start to resist the insulin, and that's how the insulin resistance is formed. So then blood glucose levels can start to rise, and the symptoms of diabetes, of polyuria and thirst can start. So we see here glucose being flushed out of the kidneys and into the urine. So carbohydrates are the only nutrient that directly impact on blood glucose levels. So when people eat carbohydrate above their tolerance level, they get the high insulin levels. The high insulin levels drive the weight gain. And because they're in energy storage mode, that person feels quite lethargic. They say, you know, I have patients come in to see me and they say, I feel tired all the time. I feel hungry all the time. And they shouldn't do, because they've got plenty of energy stored in their body, but they just can't access it. So that drives eating, and that drives sedentary behaviour. So we can call that starvation in the midst of plenty. It's like you're going out and going to the food store and buying shopping for the week, coming home, putting it in the refrigerator, but then putting a padlock on that refrigerator. The family's going to go hungry. And in a sense, that's what is happening to people when they've got high insulin levels and their body is in energy storage mode. They're storing all that energy, which means that they've got a padlock on their energy stores in their body, their fat stores in their body. They can't access them, and they can't use them as their energy source. So we need to help people to remove that padlock. No healthy adult should go hungry. So at the top corner here, top left-hand corner here, we've got an athlete, a woman with just 10-12% body fat, weighing 45 kilos. How many calories of fat do you think she has got stored in her body? 30,000? Yeah, I calculated it, 44,000. She should never go hungry. She should be able to utilise the fat stores as an energy source. The woman in the middle here, she's 70 kilos, she's got the normal amount of body fat, 25%, something like that. She has 157 calories of fat stored in her body. The obese individual at the bottom right-hand corner, She weighs 95 kilos. She's around 50% body fat. She's got more than 400,000 calories of fat in her body. Why would she say, I feel tired and hungry all the time? That should never happen. What's causing that to happen? And what is the solution? What is the real solution for this? Reduce insulin, and the best way to reduce insulin is to reduce the refined carbohydrate. So it's thinking about what you eat and when you eat. It's not about counting calories. So we educate people to understand what their carbohydrate tolerance is, because it's probably different in all of us. And so it's good to help people to experiment, to say, what is my carbohydrate tolerance level? And looking at meal frequency, because even though we know that carbohydrates has got the greatest impact on insulin levels, we also know that protein can stimulate insulin, and even fat, unless you eat fat in isolation. So meal frequency is also really important. If people are having breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, evening meal, supper, then they're going to be in energy storage mode for most of the day. And so just cutting out the snacks, the green section there is the amount of time that people can dip into their fat stores and use that as an energy source. So just simply cutting out the snacks can help people to lose weight. But time-restricted eating has also become very popular. So just missing a meal, so some people will miss evening meals, some people might miss breakfast, but cutting down to 1 or 2 meals a day can really, really help people to unlock that padlock and utilise their fat stores as an energy source. And that's what people want to do when they lose weight. Do they want to lose muscle? No, they don't. When they lose weight, they want to lose fat. We've seen, so observational studies have shown that people who eat on 3 or fewer occasions a day are more likely to have a lower body mass index. And also, having an extended overnight fast of at least 12 hours has also been shown in observational studies to lead to a reduced body mass index. They've also done experiments where they've compared continuous energy restriction with intermittent energy restriction. And you can see here there's almost twice as much weight loss from people who practice intermittent calorie restriction compared to continuous, because it doesn't damage the basal metabolic rate. And you can see here that the metabolic adaptation is 500 calories a day less with the intermittent energy restriction compared to the continuous energy restriction. So they have done work recently in people with pre-diabetes and diagnosed diabetes, looking at eating over a 6-hour period rather than a 12-hour period. And they called it, people who were allowed to eat over a 6-hour period could eat anywhere between 8 o'clock in the morning and 2 p.m. in the afternoon, whereas the people who were allowed to eat over a 12-hour period then could eat anything between 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night. They controlled their weight so they didn't lose weight. They wanted to see if there was an advantage of intermittent fasting solely down to meal frequency, and so the critics couldn't say, oh, it was down to the weight loss. So they kept weight constant. And what they found is that it reduced insulin levels, improved insulin sensitivity, reduced blood pressure, reduced inflammation and oxidative stress. Now, interestingly, fasting triglycerides went up. Well, why would that be? Because people are utilising their fat stores as an energy source, so you have more fat in the circulation because it's feeding the body. And then people say, well, fasting is just going to drive hunger. It's going to cause disordered eating. Well, is there any evidence for that? The studies have shown that there's no compensatory eating because the hunger hormones reduce, like ghrelin, insulin reduces, and the satiety hormones such as PYY actually increase. So it's the opposite of what people would think. Now, it's not just diet. We have to look at whole lifestyle. And we know that if people are permanently stressed and sleep deprived, even if they're not eating carbohydrate, their body may be on a high carbohydrate diet. So how could that happen? It's about the stress hormones like cortisol. This is the normal pattern of cortisol over a 24-hour period. So we have, on waking in the morning, we have a peak in cortisol levels. And why is that? Well, the cortisol wakes the body up for the day. So we used to say that breakfast was the most important meal of the day because we needed energy. But if we don't eat breakfast, do we fall flat? Do we faint? No, we don't, because the cortisol tells our liver to release glucose into our circulation. So that gives us an energy buzz first thing in the morning. But what happens if somebody's permanently stressed, their levels of cortisol become elevated chronically, stay up throughout the 24-hour period. And so that tells the liver to make new glucose from protein. It releases the glycogen stores into glucose, but also it tells the liver to make new glucose. For every 100 grams of protein you eat, you can make 56 grams of glucose. For every 100 grams of fat you eat, you can make 10 grams of glucose. So we can make glucose from other nutrients. And that's why carbohydrate isn't an essential nutrient. But did you know that the liver has got potential to make 600 grams of glucose, carbohydrate a day? So someone might be really strict on a low carbohydrate diet, but still not achieving their weight loss or blood glucose level targets because they're really stressed or they're not sleeping well. So we do need to look at the whole person and their lifestyle. When people are able to fuel off fat on a ketogenic diet, then what happens to the basal metabolic rate? Nothing. It doesn't reduce. So there's no metabolic adaptation. They're allowed to, because the body doesn't need to go into dietary starvation mode and the body doesn't need to conserve calories because the body's being fed. Not through what that individual is eating, the body's being fed from their fat stores. So it doesn't need to slow down and reduce basal metabolic rate. So now we have the tools, we have the information to really help people. Rather than being a starvation in the midst of plenty, we can help people to unlock that padlock and fuel from their fat stores and therefore succeed in achieving their weight loss goals. So the take-home message really is, if you want to get fat, then certainly go ahead and eat less and move more. But if you don't want to get fat, then I'd say eat less frequently. Certainly move more, we know that's good for us, but only eat real foods. And that way you can actually lose the fat and keep it off. So thank you very much for listening.